Welcome to All Things Green. I'm Anton, here with my co-host Shelby to discuss a variety of topics from across the sustainability universe. Shelby, how's your day today?
Well, I got to the studio and you handed me a plant, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yes, I did. So that plant that you have there is Tree of Heaven. It's an invasive, and it's actually the host plant of the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive insect.
Why'd you give me the invasive one?
Because I wanted the native one.
This feels like some kind of discrimination, but it's very beautiful, I have to say.
It is beautiful. Tree of Heaven is beautiful, but the spotted lanternfly just destroys crops and stuff like that, and you see them all over the place, which is bad. And if you want to chop down a Tree of Heaven, cut it off at the base, take a little bit of diesel and a paintbrush, and paint the diesel on the rootstock that you freshly cut, and that'll kill off the tree for good.
Oh, a good use for diesel then, huh?
Yeah, good use for diesel, and also for my van that I bought.
Oh, I can't wait to get into that.
Yeah,
but
not today.
Just really quickly, before I put this any closer to me than it already is, you said there's larvae on it?
Well, there was when I broke it off. I didn't see any on that particular branch, but yeah, there's like these disgusting little, like, almost like inchworm looking type of larvae, and they grow into the spotted lanternfly, which is very bad for our environment here in Ohio. And by contrast, what I have here is a native staghorn sumac, and I brought these two because you see both of these on the highway very frequently. Mm-hmm. They look really similar, but the sumac has like a more jagged leaf, and it has these bushy horns, right? That's where it gets its name, the staghorn.
I see.
And the fun part about staghorn sumac is that when these flowers kind of berryify, become berries, you can actually kind of use it, steep it in water, and create like a nice, like refreshing pink lemonade. And it's awesome.
That.
Yeah.
Well, I have to be honest, you've promised me so many things in the past, from sauerkraut to
Don't do this. I'll bring the sauerkraut next week. Next time, I promise.
That I don't even want to ask for your staghorn lemonade because I just don't want to get my hopes up.
You know, there's so many projects that I'm working on right now. Give me a little bit of grace because there's so many cool things you could do with native plants and with cabbage that sometimes it's hard to get around to all of them.
Yeah, plus you got to decorate your van with all the native plants you're collecting. So you're a little busy, I get it.
Yeah, I'm going to hang them upside down, dry out my sumacs, and yeah, that'll be fun.
I can't wait to see the final product.
Well, I got these plants on the hill, and something else that I found on the hill, the news outlet, is a horrible opinion piece.
Okay, tell me everything about it.
Well, I came across this, like, sometimes articles will just pop up in, like, my Google recommended feed, right? And I try and search for articles outside of just that, right? I don't want just the echo chamber that I'm in. But this one kind of peeved me, I'm not going to lie. It was about how somebody wrote an opinion piece about how we should just let the fossil fuel crisis, you know, the overconsumption of fossil fuels, be solved by the market, the economy. And, like, on the surface, I think, like, as Americans, we kind of think of the economy as something that kind of works itself out. You know, if you just let it alone, everything will be fine. But the fossil fuel crisis is much more urgent and needs to be solved, I think, with a little bit of government intervention. And I want to talk about that more with you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, some things in the economy, they probably do just fine, you know, being left alone. Other things, we're probably going to need the government to step in and play referee so that we don't destroy the world. You know what I mean?
It reminds me of when I took health economics in my public health training. And I'm not an economist, so I'm sure it's more complicated than what I'll lay out here. But we talked about the difference between normal goods and then health-related goods. So if you go to a grocery store and there are apples and pears, and apples cost twice as much as pears, there's not a huge difference between those two things. You don't really have to have one over the other. So if apples and pears are normal goods, it means it will respond to market forces. If apples are more expensive, people will buy pears. But if you need insulin, there's not an alternative. So no matter what the price of insulin is, you'll die without it. So it's not a normal good. You'll pay whatever you need to pay to get it, or you will perish. And so I think that might apply here when we think about the climate crisis in terms of, well, the market's not going to work itself out because we aren't actually able to see externally some of the harms that come from this. So it's not normal goods. It's more complex than that.
And you set that up perfectly. Like the fact that We're thinking that clean energy, and clean energy, by the way, is making leaps and bounds. But still, the cars that people drive, especially in poorer communities, if we were to say, okay, we're gonna have to wait around until like everybody gets an electric car, and we're gonna have to travel from place to place, like that's gonna take a long time. Like the climate crisis is much more urgent than that. And so you actually brought this up to me. Some conservatives who lean into the idea of climate change. I don't know, is there a name for those? Eco-cons or something?
Something like that. There's a group called Republic-EN.
Oh, Republican-EN. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, they are conservative Republicans who also believe in climate change and have some ideas about how to fix it, which are interesting.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because, leaving the economy alone, I was like kind of libertarian for a while, and so like that made a lot of sense. That was like an attractive argument, and I guess trying to also rope people in who kind of hold those more fiscally conservative, fiscal responsibility type of values. I think that we can find some common ground with these people.
Yeah,
when we talk
absolutely.
about, yeah.
Totally. The way I learned about Republic-EN, for example, and I, by the way, don't know if they prefer it to be pronounced Republican or Republic-EN, but I saw the founder speaking about his views on climate change and how he, as a conservative, identifies as also an environmentalist. And he gave all these examples of things that he doesn't think work in terms of economic incentives to reduce climate change. So incentives themselves were things that he didn't think worked, just giving people rewards for making better choices for the environment. And he also doesn't believe in regulation. So he doesn't want to regulate oil and gas because he doesn't believe that that supports a free market. But he was in favor of raising taxes on carbon output. And he was like raising his hands like, I know, I'm a Republican. I'm not really supposed to believe in higher taxes. But this is a crisis, and this is a way that we can avert that crisis by using the term that he didn't invent, but he used for this was externalizing internalities. So essentially showing the costs externally to the buyer of the costs that are sort of in the internal sphere of what will happen from using that product. So that was that particular person and his movement's idea, which I think you're right is a bridge between a conservative Republican who believes in climate change and wants to make a difference and someone like myself who thinks that taxes are a great way to do that, but also believes that regulations should be put into place and incentives can work.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this off air, like what I would want to say to these Republic-ENs is yes, we should do a carbon tax. And right, yes, and. I want to give them the yes, and.
Yes.
Yes, we should do this carbon tax and make sure that gasoline ends up being more expensive than, charging up an electric vehicle or even just being able to take public transit. Like, why would I want to pay, like $10 a gallon? I don't know. I'm just pulling a number out of the air.
Sure, yeah. Examples.
Why would I want to pay a ton of money for a gallon of gas when there's the bus or the train? And that's kind of where I want to get into my next point. Because if you are taxing carbon, it's kind of a regressive tax. Like rich people are going to be paying a lot for the gasoline, but also poor people are going to be paying a lot for the gasoline. And it's going to affect poor people a lot more on their minimum income to be able to support their life, getting from work, getting to work, getting to the grocery store, to the doctor's office. It's going to cost them a lot more to take their car around, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So poor people spend more of their income on purchases, on things that you have to buy rather than paying for services or investments. And so they will feel increases in the cost of carbon in a much higher percentage of their spending than a wealthier person who it will be an inconvenience. I'm not saying that I'm against this tax, but I think you're right that the approach requires more than just a tax.
Yeah, and just some ideas that I thought up of, yes to the tax, and also making sure that people can get around if they are poor, they don't have the money to spend money on gas, maybe investing in more public transit infrastructure investing in making sure that these green jobs end up in neighborhoods where people need the jobs.
Yes.
Right? Those are the kinds of things that we would look for when creating a carbon tax, so that poor people who are affected disproportionately can also make a life for themselves and be happy and
Thrive.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I think it's just another example of how the market is only one force that's at play here. So, yes, there are market forces that will impact the climate, and I want those market forces working in our favor. But this is why we have things like regulations, laws, government oversight, because there are other consequences that will impact everyday Americans in ways that might feel unintended compared to the goal of that tax.
Yeah. So I hope that, in talking about this, talking about Republic-ENs, I hope that that conversation can permeate to people on the even further right, although I'm not entirely sure that it would. But I think the fact that we would want to see fiscal responsibility and a little bit more, I think that's important. I think so many times the left will get painted as like just not fiscally responsible. The right will get painted as fiscally responsible, whereas really we all want our tax dollars stewarded, and we all want communities to thrive at the end of the day. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So on to our next, Shelby.
Yeah.
What do you have for us?
Well, we just got talking about taxing oil, and I'm not normally pro oil, but there is an oil that I love.
Oh.
Olive oil.
Ah, how nice.
Anton, I know that you cook a lot,
Yeah.
regardless of the fact that I have yet to see it in person here. But when you cook, do you use olive oil?
Yeah, I use olive oil all the time. It's like one of the healthier ones, right? Maybe the healthiest oil? No? Yeah? No?
That's a complicated question to answer.
Oh, okay.
But
This public health over here
I know.
Can't answer yes or no on my olive oil question.
Well, I'm not a dietitian, but I will say that I use olive oil all the time. Basically every single time I cook, I use olive oil. So I was really disheartened to read this article from The Guardian, which reported that the olive oil industry is, and I quote, in crisis.
No.
Spain produces about half of the global olive crop.
Dang.
And it has been really hot in Spain.
Yeah, we talked about that in one of our previous episodes. I don't know if it's the same region, but...
Where they're moving the fish out of the lakes
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
that hot. Yes. So this spring and summer have been really hot in Spain. Last year was really hot too, and it resulted in the worst yield for the olive crop in almost a decade. But they had some stock in reserve that they were able to use to sort of make up the difference. This year that stock has been depleted, so we will not be able to make up the difference with reserve olives, and that means bad things for olive oil.
For all of us.
For all of us.
Sorry, I freaking had to. That was fun.
I liked it. Actually, I loved it. So this year is looking a little better in terms of temperature than last year, but another heat wave just hit Spain recently, and temperatures reached a devastating 111 degrees Fahrenheit. And at those temperatures, trees will begin to drop fruit that hasn't quite ripened up, so you can't use that fruit for anything.
Shoot.
So that the trees will be able to reserve their internal water reserves.
Yeah.
This kind of depletion of the yield of olives has almost doubled the price of wholesale olives and of olive oil. And pricing could get worse if Spain and other producers like Italy and Portugal continue to experience extreme heat events.
Yeah.
And those costs are going to be passed on to consumers. We just talked about regressive costs in terms of taxes. I'm not going to call this a regressive cost, but it would affect poor families more.
Yeah.
How do you see the increase in olive oil prices impacting you or other people?
Yeah, I mean, man, I'll probably be more frugal with my olive oil first of all if it's going to be double in price.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably lean into like using like cheaper oils like canola oils maybe more often. But that's a bummer because like olive oil, there's nothing like it. Like when you're cooking Italian or something like that,
Yes.
you need that olive oil.
Yeah, or maybe you end up using things like palm oil that are cheap but also destroy palm trees. So this is really bad news, I think, for
Yeah.
both of us personally, as people who like to cook, but also for anyone out there who uses olive oil or other olive-related products. And it, to me, is just one indicator of what we already know, which is that climate change is going to have global impacts on supply chains. Thinking about a world where I go to the grocery store and have to choose not to purchase olive oil because it's too expensive, or really have to budget for olive oil,
Yeah.
just gave me flashbacks to early COVID.
Those are bad flashbacks.
Really bad flashbacks. Do you remember the first time you went to a grocery store when the supply chains were totally backed
Yeah.
up?
Oh, I don't just remember the first time. I remember there was like the chicken era, the egg era, the pork era. There was like a bunch of eras where it's just like, man, I wonder what's going to be like astronomically pricey this time when I go to the grocery store.
Yeah, and those are all things that were really pricey, but I can remember the first time I went to the grocery store and there just weren't products
Yeah.
on the shelf. Like looking for garlic and it just wasn't there.
Yeah, that's wild.
Or if you wanted a fruit, it was like, hope you enjoy your red delicious apple. That's all you're gonna get.
The worst apple.
The worst apple for sure.
That's the villain of apples right there.
100%. If you're a red delicious apple eater, please write in and let us know what's wrong with you. So yeah, I started thinking about global supply chain issues. And so right now we're not necessarily seeing, oh, olive oil is not going to make its way to the States for us to purchase. It's just going to be a lot more expensive. But that's the stage we're in now. We don't know what the
Yeah.
next stage could look like. And I really don't want to go to the grocery store and not be able to purchase all of the foods that I love to eat. But I also sometimes wonder about getting those foods from so far away in the first place. And I know you're really passionate about local food systems, as am I. So I thought I'd give you an opportunity to tell me your thoughts on that too. Just
Well,
where
yeah.
are foods coming from?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? Because, like, that, you know, olive oil from Italy or Spain or Croatia or Portugal, like, man, it's so good, right? And, like, there's a little bit of maybe climate guilt, right? Of, like, having these products shipped across the world to your local grocery store. And it's like, it's so good. How am I going to give up olive oil? But I wonder if there's a way that, you know, we could still see local food networks create products like these. Maybe it wouldn't be as good as olive oil coming from Italy. Maybe it would, because it would be fresher and right there in your backyard. But
Yeah.
you know, relying on some of our local food systems, I think, is really important. And I think we're only going to see this happen more often with climate change, right? It's olive oil today. What's next? You know, something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe not. Maybe we have to kind of learn to embrace, you know, the fact that we're not going to have products that we want all the time, and we're going to have to lean into our local food systems.
It's sort of a bleak future. Not the leaning into local food systems part, but the idea of the reasons for that. I wish
Yeah.
the reasons we leaned into the local food system were supporting local agriculture, local farmers,
right.
local food sellers and businesses, and that can all be a part of the equation. Those are all the reasons that I try to buy local when I can,
Yeah.
but I don't like the idea of throwing our hands up and saying, well, climate change is just going to keep happening.
it's just
so
happenstance.
This is just how it is, because it's going to start to happen here too. I mean,
Yeah.
even leaning into our local
Yeah.
food systems, climate change will impact the whole world. So
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit of a bummer. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, it happens.
You know, tell your olive oil that you love it when you
Yeah.
get home.
You
That
never
you
know.
appreciate it.
You never know the last time you're going to be able to tell your olive oil you love it.
Exactly. Treat it nice. Tell me about an oil that's not so nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about, this is a little bit of a fracking segment.
No. Do
yeah.
you know anything about fracking?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm a little bit obsessed with talking about fracking.
I'm into it.
There was a study that came out by Ohio River Valley Institute studying a county in Pennsylvania called Beaver County. And Beaver County housed a Shell like the company, a Shell cracker plant. And Shelby, we've talked a little bit about cracker plants before, but I'm just going to go over it really quick for some of our listeners who hasn't heard that episode.
Yeah, please do, because I already started thinking about like cheese and crackers. And
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's not what it is.
Yeah, we're not talking about Ritz. We're not talking about saltines or oysters or any of those multigrain crackers. We're talking about a pipeline of natural gas that goes into a big industrial operation, and they use high heat and pressure to basically explode this natural gas into different plastic pellet compounds, and then they use fossil fuels to then ship those plastic pellets out to make single-use plastics and other things. So this is like a really dirty industry. This is really not somewhere that would be fun to work. And on top of that, the Ohio River Valley Institute study showed that this cracker plant moving in actually hurt the county's local economy. So many times oil and gas industries will come into a county and talk to the elected officials, and they'll say, hey, this is going to bring people here, this is going to bring jobs, this is going to bring this, that, and the other. And we see over and over again counties in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, the GDP and the actual jobs either kind of stay the same or they actually go down. And one of the big reasons for this, I mean, some people might not think this way, but as somebody who lives in an urban area and hasn't really needed to live by an injection well or a cracker plant, I think, why the heck would I want to move into next to a fracking operation where it's loud and it's bright all the time and it's like you have a higher risk of getting cancer? Like, what are the draws there for these cracker plants? So
I imagine that there are people who would paint this as an opportunity to work. But it sounds like the study you're referencing didn't show that that was true for Beaver County.
Right. And this is something that we've talked about on the podcast before. Like, workers often kind of get the raw end of the deal. Workers sometimes are paid as contractors, so they're not protected under jobs. They're not given the proper PPE or even always let in the know about the dangers that they're facing with an oil and gas industry. Sometimes these are part-time employees that don't get benefits, and even when it is a full-time job, you're not always going to get the pay that you hoped for a dirty industry that you can get injured or, end up with severe health problems later in life.
And I think I remember you telling me once that because of the secrecy in the industry, if those workers do get sick and go to the doctor, they're not even allowed to know what made them sick, just that they are. Yeah,
it's wild. The legislation that's written to protect the oil and gas industry is sick. And on top of all of this, we see right here in Ohio, we actually have the lowest severance tax in the country. And what that means is whenever you're extracting oil or some type of natural resource, you have to pay a certain amount of tax on each barrel or cubic foot of natural gas. And Ohio is really low. This is going to sound low, and that's because it is low. The severance tax is a dime for a barrel of crude oil, 42 gallons, a dime of tax for every barrel of crude oil, and half of a nickel for 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. And that's like 6 regular, like 20-pound propane tanks that you'd hook up to your gas grill or something.
Do we know what average is in the states?
That I don't know. I can find that and put it in the show notes for you. But the fact that the legislators have such a low severance tax in Ohio, they write laws to welcome the oil and gas industry in, and then the industry just lets working communities, poor communities, Appalachian communities down. Like, it's just sickening to see. It's honestly horrible. And I don't know. I don't know that some of these politicians have a conscience. It doesn't take much for a campaign contribution or even just some empty promises to get elected officials on board with oil and gas, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I can sense that. It reminds me somewhat of when we recently talked about Deb Haaland and the Willow Pipeline and how some of the reasons for pushing that project forward, as stated by folks in favor of the project, were bringing jobs into Alaska. And I don't have a feasibility study or a cost-benefit study in front of me to make any broad claims about it, but it does make me wonder whether those kinds of studies were done, or was it just, it's a new business so we know it will bring jobs? Did we consider the things that you're talking about that were uncovered in this study when we moved forward with that project? Was there evidence of what that would mean for workers in Alaska?
And I actually talked to one of the former county commissioners of Athens County, Ohio. Her name is Roxanne. She's an excellent mentor to me. I work with her at Buckeye Environmental Network. And, she basically, as somebody who was on the elected official side and talking to oil and gas industries, like these industries are going to create whatever stats they want. They're going to say whatever jobs they're going to fulfill, whatever GDP is going to be raised in the county, whatever benefits they're going to give to the state in severance tax. But we see empty promises over and over again with the oil and gas industry. And on top of that, they are just ruthlessly trying to get into Ohio. And I'm kind of saying it's a little bit conspiracy-ish, but with the state fracking public lands campaign right now in Ohio, where oil and gas industries are trying to lease public lands. Recently, it was found out that there are over 900 fraudulent comments. Whether it's from the oil and gas industry or not, we don't know, but they were all comments that were pro oil and gas. When Roxanne gave these people a call that was linked to the address, they said, no, we didn't submit these comments. That's obviously my email and my name, but no, I did not submit these comments. So just like ruthless, horrible stories about the oil and gas industry trying to fight tooth and nail to, do as much fracking as they can in Ohio. It's horrible.
That is really horrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. And it's frustrating to hear about false promises that are made to communities that really need it.
Absolutely. So the best thing that we really can do is advocate for green energy, green projects. We see other case studies by the Ohio River Valley Institute showing that communities who have previously gone the fracking route and the fossil fuel route, they've actually been able to thrive on these green energy manufacturing jobs. They are more sustained rather than just fracking, going in, extracting all the oil and leaving maybe 10 or 15, 20 years later. These jobs are here to stay, and these are also jobs that are cutting edge. The technology is always getting better, and so we can hope that the case studies that they've shown that green energy is the way to go when investing in Appalachian communities. We can hope that the politicians and the elected officials, they can see the light on that and they can drift towards that, I guess.
Yeah, there's the optimism that we want at the end.
That's the optimism we need, honestly.
Yeah, I sure hope that that's all true and that we'll be able to work towards a better future together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shelby, thank you so much for talking all things green with me. Would you please let our viewers know how they can stay in touch with us?
Of course. If you'd like to stay connected to us, be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at One Planet Media. That's ONE1. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, check out our YouTube channel, All Things Green Show. You can find all of our sources from today's episode in our show notes.
We'll be back at the same time next week to bring you more news. Thank you so much for being a part of the global sustainability movement.